Hello. How many people we got here? Oh, not bad. All right. I don't know how this is going to go, but let's see. This is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords, coming to you live. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about Lion and Dragon today. And in order to be able to show you the pages, I've got to set this up in some way. Um, I'm going to see what I can do here. This could be tricky, especially with this cat here. Uh, yeah, I'm talking about you. See, she knows. All right, let me see here. Because I also want to be able to keep my hands free, not just to turn the pages, but for the obvious necessity of smoking a pipe, which is like practically, obligatory. So, let me get this comfortable here. Well, that's looking sort of okay there. Let's see here. Not bad. The angle might have to change over the course of time here, but I've got this thing. Yeah, I've got it set up so I can have it kind of like in a resting position while I look at the comments. Can everybody hear me okay? Am I audible? I guess no comment on whether I'm audible or not. Okay, I guess that's a yeah. All right. Very good. So, yeah, luckily this is a good camera. All right. Today, this is basically an ad. All right. I'm not gonna try to like pussyfoot around that fact. If you're not interested in Lion and Dragon, then you probably just aren't gonna have a lot of interest in this video. Of course, I might end up talking about other things. You never know. I tried to film this as just a fixed video review. The problem was that it took me like 50 minutes to go through all of Lion and Dragon, and that required I had to do like 3 tries, 3 takes. I wasn't happy with any of them. So instead, I'm just going to kind of talk about Lion and Dragon, show you some stuff. And what I figure is I've got this YouTube channel. People have been seeing this cover because usually it's one of the covers I put on here, right? You've been seeing this for a year now, right? And some of you own it. That's great. I thank you so much, Unscripted and Unchained, for having both Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion. And thanks to everyone who's bought the book. But some of you might be still trying to make up your mind about it. And I figured it might be a good idea if you could have a video where you look on the inside and where I talk a little bit about what makes the game special and what makes it different from kind of D&D or other fantasy games, right? So mostly it's for you to get a look on the inside and to kind of talk a bit about what are the special features that L&D has, even compared to other OSR games. And we'll see how much that covers. Yeah, I like Scotsman too. So, Lion and Dragon, first thing you have to know about it is it's an OSR game. I'm guessing all of you listening right now as we're live, and probably most people who will end up watching this video, you already know what an OSR game is, but some of you might not. And if you don't, there's another video that I've done that you can look back, look at my channel. You'll find one about how the OSR is cutting edge and will change what you think about D&D or how you think about D&D. Something like that. It's the name of the title. And that's where I explain everything about what the OSR is. So I'm not going to go into detail about it, except to say that basically it takes old school D&D rules and creates new games for it. Sometimes those games are very kind of conventional. Sometimes, though, they're very avant-garde. And sometimes they're like Lion and Dragon, where they aren't, you can't really call it avant-garde, except that it pushes the D&D rules into a radical new direction that they've never been in before. The second thing you have to know about Lion and Dragon, this is all very self-explanatory, is that it's medieval authentic. And what does this mean? Well, a medieval authentic game this is because, see how that looks there. I don't know. It's medieval authentic because it's meant to effectively recreate what the Middle Ages were actually like, what the medieval period was actually like in terms of the society, right? And the social paradigm. That's the main thing. I don't know if you guys can see any of this at all, though. Like, let me know. We'll kind of try to work around this. There are a set of default setting assumptions to the medieval authentic world that D&D doesn't usually have. Like, D&D is not really the medieval authentic world. It's usually more like medieval fun time Renaissance fair, right? And so, like, one of these assumptions is, you're going to see it right there, social status is extremely important, right? This is a big deal in the medieval world, and it's almost never a big deal in D&D. In D&D, there's like, you know, people remember that there's nobles when it's like important for an adventure that it'd be a noble, but it's like nobles are just basically wealthy peasants, and peasants are poor nobles, right? Like, they're all the same thing. They're all really just middle-class Americans, basically. And they act that way in the sense that, you know, the big difference between nobles and peasants is that nobles are rich and peasants aren't, and that's not accurate in any way. Right? It just bears no resemblance to what the medieval authentic period was like. So one of the conceits of this setting is that social class is very important, and that there's social class distinctions. All right, that's a major step. Another one, monotheism. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Christianity. Look at this. It doesn't necessarily have to be Christianity, but it has to be a belief, a single dominant religion, a belief in a single God, and a hierarchical church. If you don't have that, you're not playing in the medieval period. Because that's more than anything at all, is what defines the Middle Ages, right? Wow. We still on? Yeah, okay, that's still working. I'm still trying to figure out what the best way to film this damn thing. All right. Life is cheap. Magic is rare. Civilization is survival. Those are the other kind of conceits. And you can see that's just like 2 pages. But it's meant to give you a very good first impression. There's much more details about that in like the setting book. But I wanted to get people to have an idea of what this was about, right? So Vision Storm 1 says, I prefer ancient paganism in my games. Well, great. You can prefer ancient paganism all you like. If you're playing a game set in the ancient pagan world, say like, you know, Roman or Greek adventurers, then that could work. But it doesn't work if you're playing in a medieval setting. It doesn't at all. Because one of the essential characteristics of the medieval setting is this all-consuming and universal Catholic, so to say, not necessarily literally Catholic, but in the sense of Catholic meaning all-encompassing faith, okay? And it's a faith in a single God. And and that's very important because you have to have a hierarchical church that acts as the counterweight for the crowns of the medieval world. These are all things that are important for social reasons, right? I'm not saying this because I'm a Christian, because I'm not. I'm not a Christian, right? I'm saying this because I'm a historian, right? And that's absolutely essential. Cardcaptor Lee says you'd like to see a Celtic version of Lion and Dragon. Well, I don't think that's very likely to happen, but have you checked out the latest RPG Pundit Presents? It's called The Path of Trees, and it's basically a system of Celtic magic of traveling to the spirit worlds of trees and fighting the dangers that are there to obtain things that you can bring back to you for magical charms and power. So it's a very, very Celtic style of magic, a magical system. It's one of many supplements for Lion and Dragon, because Lion and Dragon, the RPG Pundit Presents series, about half of the RPG Pundit Presents series are supplementary material for Lion and Dragon that you can use to supplement the game. So it's a supported game. That's an important thing to know if you want to. It's a complete game. This book is complete in and of itself. You don't need anything else to just play the game. It doesn't really have any setting material in it except for a little bit of stuff at the back. But you could do it. You could just use this. But there's a lot of stuff that you can also get if later on you want to get more stuff. There's the RPG Pundit Presents series. There's a whole bunch of PDF right now. Eventually it's going to be a solid book that you will be able to, well, a series of solid books that will have all kinds of additional content for Lion and Dragon rules, adventures, and other stuff like that. Mariah Sinclair says, I was wondering how historically accurate Lion and Dragon is from a social point of view. How would it be in regards to a female character in the setting? Well, I was going to talk about that, actually. The thing is, obviously, in the Middle Ages, there were very, very strict gender roles. And what you can't do if you're going to run a medieval authentic game is have a game where men and women are exactly the same, and the strong female protagonist goes around kicking everyone's ass, and everyone acts like that's just normal, and she encounters no difficulties, because nowadays, that apparently it's the feminist thing to do, to have the strong female character encounter absolutely no difficulties. If she encounters difficulties, that's patriarchy, and you can't have that. So you have to have this non-story where the whole thing is just strong female character exists, the end. Right? But that would be impossible in a medieval authentic context. But I do have a section where I talk about character gender, which is there. I talk about also in Dark Albion, right? But what I basically explain here is that I'm doing a bit of a conceit for the sake of, oh, thank you. She said, Mariah Sinclair says, love your videos, by the way. Thank you so much. I'm doing a bit of a conceit in being slightly anachronistic in the sense that I'm using incredible exceptions to the medieval rule as kind of closer to common stuff in the setting of Lion and Dragon, which is to say, there were some women who put on armor and fought as knights, Jeanne d'Arc being probably the most famous example. They were super, super duper rare in real medieval history. But in a setting, if you want the setting to be playable for female characters, then maybe that's a little bit more common, right? Also, you have, the clerics. One of the classes in Lion and Dragon are clerics. Clerics are basically like a cross between living saints and Templar knights. So they're an order, a monastic and knightly order that serves the church, answers only to the Pope, and they're basically people that have saintly powers. They're the actual true paladins of the church. And they're kind of an anachronism too that I put in there so that there would be the living saint type of character, and so that there would be a cleric class in the game. But I did it by incorporating it to stuff from what was the real life Templar order, which gives you a good structure there for something that really was medieval. The thing is, though, I decided, well, in the real life, there were male and female saints. God didn't seem to discriminate between male and female saints, right? So in the clerical order, men and women both end up being clerics, right? And a female cleric is going to be treated exactly the same as a male cleric because of that kind of divine intervention that happened in her having shown, miraculous gifts at an early age and been inducted into the clerical order, okay? So you've got the clerics, you've got fighters, you can have, women, kind of a Brienne of Tarth sort of character, which would be to say a female character that, I don't know, she grew up in a mercenary camp or something like that. Her father was a mercenary. She showed, a predilection to it and ends up becoming a competent fighter, okay? So this is one way that you can kind of incorporate female characters, but I also maintain certain strict limits. For example, the universities didn't accept women. So if you're playing a magister and who's a man, and if he's of the burgher class, the villain class, or higher, a city dweller or higher, that character went to one of the great colleges, Oxford or Cambridge. He has all kinds of social connections because of that. He has a certain amount of legitimacy that gives him cover to perform magic because he's a magister of Oxford or Cambridge. a female magister, even of that class, wouldn't get to have that. She would have learned magic in secret, and she would be kind of unlicensed, you could say, right? Which would make it more difficult for her. So there are lots of things, lots of moments where if you play a female character, it is going to be more difficult for you because you're a woman. And that should be that way. And that's going to be part of the challenge. And a DM should try to make it so that it is challenging without being absolutely impossible, right? And that's the orientation that I decide to put into Lion and Dragon. I hope that answers your question. Ovaltine Patrol says, is it strictly medieval or are there ancient aliens, real Atlantis, etc.? No, it is strictly medieval. But here's another thing about medieval authentic play, Ovaltine, is that the strictly medieval is a lot weirder than what you might think, right? Like, all right, I was kind of going to go in order here, but I'm going to kind of jump around here. So, like, let's take a look at, like creatures, right? The back of Lion and Dragon, the first appendix, has all kinds of creatures, right? Starting with ordinary animals and, demons, dragons, elves, etc., right? It has a big collection of fantastical creatures. So, there's a unicorn. This unicorn is going to be nothing like not nothing, but very, very different from the unicorn of any monster manual from Dungeons and Dragons, right? Trolls, giants, they're all based on actual medieval folklore and mythology, and they're presented in those places. And there were, medieval fishmen. There was a whole kingdom under the sea of fairies, and not only was there that kingdom, but supposedly there was, there was a people that were descended from those fairies. Her family claimed descent from like a fairy queen that lived in the water, right? Like they claimed descent from her, right? And the women of that, part of the charming, enchanting beauty of the women of her family, which were considered, Elizabeth Woodville was considered the most beautiful woman in England at that time, was because of that legend, right? So there can be a lot of weird stuff. If you look at, there's the Cults of Chaos source book, which I might someday cover here too. You get into some really, really weird stuff, including stuff that like borders on space aliens. There were like these sky gods, these Celtic sky gods that you read that and you're like, yeah, okay, these are aliens, right? The star folk or whatever they were called. They were like seen as like a kind of either demigods or elves that lived up in the stars, right? And they would like kidnap people and take parts of their bodies away, right? So like this is seriously, medieval version of UFO stuff, right? And medieval versions of Atlantis, so to say, right? So all of that shows up in Lion and Dragon, right? Like you've got the undead are the way that they work, not in standard D&D, but the way that they worked in medieval folklore. All right. Prester John, George Whittlesbach, Lorraine McLaren, Hoopy asks, I don't mention him in Lion and Dragon because that's more of a setting thing, but I mean, it's presumed, I think in Dark Albion, where I mention like distant lands, I name drop Prester John because that was a real thing, right? So there's going to be all kinds of strangeness in this game, but one of the very important kind of rules of that strangeness, one of the rules of the way that the setting is conceded to be, is that the weirdness, the dangerous, the chaotic is out in the wilderlands, right? The closer you are to the heartland, to the civilization, like the typical peasant might be born, lived, and died, just like they did in the real Middle Ages, without ever having seen a fantastic creature. But they knew those fantastic creatures existed. They existed out in the mountains or in the middle of the forest. It's just that no creatures existed. They existed out in the mountains or in the middle of the forest. It's just that no peasant in his right mind would go out there, right? Because of that, because of how dangerous it was. So there's a thematic here. This is symbolic. The idea of the monsters that live in the depth of the woods or in the heights of the mountains or deep in caves or out in the frontier, right? Where only crazy people go, right? Or where people who have no other choice go, right? To where outlaws are go. right? Or where people who have no other choice go, right? To where outlaws are. That's where the monsters are. That's where all the magic is. This is symbolic of this psychological struggle between civilization and barbarism, right? The medieval period was a period that happened after all of a civilization, the Roman civilization, collapsed. And you entered into this era of absolute savagery, and it spent 1,000 years being a struggle where at every moment you're at this tipping point between like the barest bones of what a functional civilization was and anarchy, right? And chaos. And you saw it in the history of England over and over again. Moments where England was stable and then suddenly plunged into a civil war because they didn't have a real like sophisticated civilization. They had what started in the early medieval period, basically a bunch of tough guys and like a mafia, right? The Shorts asks, is this ascending AC? Yes, it is ascending AC. The armor, I guess I'm doing more of a Q&A than a step-by-step explanation here, but why the hell not, right? If this is what people want to ask, I want to tell them. So there's the armor system. The armor here is based on what actual 15th century armor types would have been, which is very different than what you would have had. And even there, for example, like chain hauberk, no one would use that anymore by like the second half of the 15th century, right? So this is like, again, all of this is research, right? The equipment section is based all on the most accurate possible lists of medieval economics that you could have, right? And as you can see, prices aren't in gold pieces and silver pieces or what have you. They're in pence and shillings and pounds, right? Though just to stop Americans from going insane, I slightly simplified that into something a little bit closer to to the metric system. It's not quite metric, but it's not like 7.5 farthings to the groat or something like that, right? Like the sort of stuff that'll just leave you. That's like really cool in one sense, but it's just such a hassle in terms of playability. So I always try to get it in between the two things, right? The Schwartz says, serving your customers, I'm sold. I hope that was in reference to this. Oh, no, maybe it was in reference to something that Card Captor Lee is talking about on there, about making his own game. You're stealing my thunder, Lee. Stop it. All right. So, getting back to where I was, right? No, it's all right. Don't worry about it. No, that's not where I was. I wanted to talk a bit about like character creation, right? Because this is something where it varies considerably from mainstream D&D, but it also varies considerably from other OSR games. Okay. George Riddlebox, Lorraine McLaren Hoopy says, in Dark Albion, you need a language proficiency to talk with people from Newcastle. You probably should, but no, you don't. However, I did consider making Scotsman a completely different language. All right, so when you're rolling up a character in Lion and Dragon, you start out with rolling your ability scores, which if you're used to mostly new school D&D, that right there is going to be a shock, because you're going to be rolling 3d6 in order, right? That means you roll 3d6 for your strength, and whatever you get on that die, that's your strength. 3d6 on dexterity, that's your dexterity. That's just the way it works, right? It just goes like that and in order. And there are prerequisites of ability scores for each of the classes. So to be a fighter, you need at least a 9 in strength. A cleric needs at least a 9 in wisdom. A magister, a 9 in intelligence. A thief, 9 in dexterity. Scotsman, 9 in constitution. And a Kimmery traveler needs at least a 9 in charisma. If you have less than 9 in anything, then, well, if all you have is the main book, you can roll again, because your character sucks so badly that he has to roll again. But if what you're going for is to have a suboptimal character, There is actually an RPG Pundit Presents sourcebook that offers some kind of lesser classes besides the main ones that are in the main book, which are Craftsman, Priest, Courtier, and Sage, which are really interesting classes to play, but they're weaker classes. Just checking here the notes. Solomon Kane asks, which has better quality book, Lulu or Drive-Thru? I'm trying to remember if Lion and Dragon is available on Lulu. I'm not 100% sure about that. Dark Albion is available on Lulu, and the Dark Albion books on Lulu, the hardcover, are excellent, excellent quality. And okay, so if you've seen it on Lulu, then I would say get it on Lulu if you want the hardcover especially. Because I got both the soft cover and the hardcover. I got them from DTRPG. The soft cover, which is the one I'm using right now, has held up really, really good. It's worked really well. The hardcover, it might have just been my copy. I don't want to critique DTRPG excessively, but it's a little bit worse for wear. It's a lot more worse for wear now in terms of like the binding and stuff than my Dark Albion book, which I've had for much, much longer. My hardcover Dark Albion book I've had for years, and the binding is still doing really, really well, and all of the book in general is doing really, really well. So if you're going to get a soft cover, it probably doesn't matter. You can get it from Drive-Thru. But if you're getting the hardcover copy, try it from Lulu. I think it probably would be better. Okay. The next thing you do, ethnic background. There are no non-human player character races in Dark Albion. In Lion and Dragon, in Dark Albion either. So you can play ethnic background. The basic ones here are, Englishman, Scotsman, or Cymry Traveller. It's a Welsh gypsy, you could say. And that's it. But there are no elves, no dwarves, no halflings. I mean, there are those things. There's elves as monsters. They're terrible, terrible, inhuman monsters that do terrible things to you. And your player characters will be scared shitless of them, right? There are not elves as like Legolas and you get to play him, right? Solomon, I don't think Lulu has a book and PDF option. If you want that, you probably have to get it through Drive-Thru RPG. I'm sorry to say, because I believe that the PDFs are only available from Drive-Thru RPG. Next, you get social class, and social class is something that you roll. As you can see, I hope you can see anyways, there's a random table. Now, a DM could be running a game where what he wants is he wants all of his player characters to be, to be peasants, right? He wants to run a filthy peasant campaign. Then he doesn't have to tell, you don't have to tell your players to roll, right? Likewise, if he wants to do like a Game of Thrones style game where they're all scheming aristocrats, right? Then you probably don't have to roll there either, right? The DM always has the final word on these things, but you will see that here statistically your social class will vary, and the odds of being like, a serf or a peasant are less than that of being a villain, a city-born free man, right? And of course, there's very little chance that you're going to be part of any of the nobility, even a knight or higher, right? So most characters are going to be freemen, which makes sense. These are characters in a default setup, right, of the game. Your average adventuring character, even though, they were only like, I think maybe 20% or less of the population, these are the people that were able to move around and would have a reason to move around. So they would be the most obvious social class for characters to be in. They're also probably the most relatable to modern people. Unless you really know how to, play your medieval aristocrats. Solomon Kane asks, is it racist that I think humans are the best race? No. In fact, that's absolutely right, and I've done a video about that, right? Where I think if you look back in my videos, you'll find it. It's called Your Favorite D&D Race Sucks Unless It's Human. Humans are by far the most interesting race. So Aaron asks, I've been trying to figure out how to bring very different characters together for a campaign. You get mixed social classes. Okay, so if you run an L&D game and you've got characters that are from very mixed social backgrounds, what you want to do is figure out how to incorporate these together, right? One of the things you got to remember is character class also has an effect here in that if your character is a cleric, it doesn't matter if they were born a peasant, they act as though they were a knight. So that also moves them up a notch, right? What you could put together as a diverse group of characters, if you have like one or two characters who are nobles or, you know, a cleric, if the cleric is the highest social class of the group being, you know, equivalent to a knight, then what you could have is a retinue that is like a group of inquisitors, right? A cleric with his agents, you know, that are all basically being patronized by the church to go out and hunt heretics or, you know, monsters or witches or whatever you want them to hunt. That's the basic model of the Cults of Chaos campaign. Cults of Chaos is a source book for Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion. So that's a perfect setup. If you what you have is like a noble, you could say that the rest of the PCs are part of the retinue of a noble, right? Like your noble is probably the second son of some important, you know, lord or something. And this party is the group of people that he hangs out with. And you can then decide what that noble is up to. Like, are they participating in the War of the Roses? Are they working for their father, who's a lord, who has a lot of political intrigues involved? Are they in charge of patrolling the family's lands? You know, you just have to kind of work it out to put them together. But what it's going to do, one thing that's going to happen, almost for sure, unless all of your characters are of exactly the same social class, is that certain players are by definition going to be are by definition going to be unequal, right? There's going to be a guy in there that can give orders to the others to a certain extent, or that has to be at least respected. So this is something to watch out for. It means that you've got to have your players understand that these social hierarchies exist, and that they're going to have to kind of go along with them, right? Which means that but it's very important not to fall either into stereotypes, right? People tend to want to imagine, oh, medieval nobles must have all been assholes, right? They must have been all these, you know, sadistic monsters or something like that. When actually the reason that the medieval system worked for so long is that most nobles were, you know, trained from birth to be very responsible, very devout people with a great sense of responsibility over the people in their care, right? And that they would have, you know, the contemptible noble that you see, like the knight that just abuses everyone or stuff like that you see in modern fiction, is largely a product of neo-Marxist degenerates who hate all concepts of hierarchy. And it's, you know, it's the exception, but it's absolutely the exception rather than the rule, right? The aristocracy in the Middle Ages there were certainly bad people around, you know, Gilles de Rais and people like that, but they were the monstrous exception to the rule that everybody else saw and said, this is awful, right? These people are terrible people. They would have been seen as that in the time. So, what have we got here? Somebody says girdler is misspelt. Grilder. No, I think that's actually a medieval spelling, actually. It's Grilder is the medieval way of spelling that. It's not a spelling error. Card Captain Lee says, would L&D be good for an authentic, for a medieval authentic game in Italy or France? Yeah, it certainly could be. There's no reason. I mean, especially, you know, 15th century France was in many ways quite similar to 15th century England. Italy had the big difference in Italy is that there were the city-states, they were more broken up. But there's no reason you couldn't run those if you did the research yourself on the setting, right? Greasy Smith says, oh, wow, another unannounced live stream. What a surprise. Well, I've been thinking about this. And here's what I think I'm going to do, Greasy. When the time comes that I hit 1,000 subscribers, we're at 826 subscribers right now, I believe. Thereabouts, anyways. And when I get to 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to start doing more videos than I'm doing right now. I'm going to do 1+, you could say. I'm going to do like at least 1 a week, but usually 2 a week. Not always. I don't want to be like absolutely compromised, but most of the time. And when that happens, I'm going to start doing announced live streams. All right. That's my promise to you. at least once a month, there'll be a live stream that'll actually be announced days in advance, so that people will be forewarned. Um, Getting back on topic, Card Captor Lee says, I think an Italian supplement for L&D would be awesome. Well, maybe at some point I'll do a Pundit Presents stuff with details about the city-states or something like that. Yeah, it is rich subject matter, no question about it. Geeky Bugle says, why don't you announce the live streams? Well, I tried to this time. I announced it a half hour in advance. I did. I actually, that is the best I've ever done. And here you are still criticizing me. I know I suck, but it's the best I've ever done. Like, I actually managed to give a 30-minute notice. Solomon Kane said, I was watching a live play of the new Forbidden Lands game, and the players had all these concerns about racism and torture, and the DM mentioned the X card. What the fuck, right? Yeah, I don't know. That's what we're fighting against here. This is why we fight, right? People like that, we have to. They need to see that the regular people need to see that there's an alternative to that sort of nonsense. All right. So, am I still with you guys? Yeah. All right. Grounded Axeblade said, my cleric in this game I made last Tuesday was having problems with rolling randomly on the trade chart. So he turned out to be the youngest of 6 sons, and I ended up making a little list. Okay. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but fair enough. Let's keep looking here. Mariah Sinclair says, I'm really liking this product so far. I'll drop a hint to my boyfriend so I can introduce to the group I run for. I'm the sort who likes a darker and grittier setting and play. Mariah, I really appreciate that. I'm sure you'll like it. I'm sure your group will like it. If you like the kind of the grittiness that you see in kind of accounts of the War of the Roses, right, in the Shakespeare sagas of that period, or in stuff like Game of Thrones, right? This is a game that is set up very much for that, right? And you're going to see when I talk about like hit points and things like criticals that this is a big part of it. Also, the magic system in this game, you don't have raise dead, right? When you're dead, you're dead. And I mean, barring possible divine intervention in the rarest of cases, maybe. But other than that, you could have one of the things about Lion and Dragon is that you could have very powerful, very competent characters at relatively low levels. Like a 5th level character in this game is really, really effective. I've seen it over and over again in a campaign, even compared to other OSR games. But they're still much more vulnerable, and even at higher levels, it's a game where if you get a really lucky combo, a peasant, a 1st level peasant could kill a 9th level knight in full armor, right? It could happen by a lucky shot. Just like, lucky shots took out so many famous medieval figures, right? This is a big part of authenticity, is that you have these great heroes that just suddenly, they die in some moment because it's not a novel, it's history. That's how it went. So it is grittier. It has darker elements in some ways. PCs are unequal. It provides an opportunity for role play, says Aaron, RPA. And yeah, that's absolutely right. It should be carefully role played when you do that, right? You have to have players learning how to be different to other players depending on their social class. And what you have to understand as a DM is that the different social classes are going to have different utility, right? A noble can do things. It's absolutely true. If your player character is a noble, he's going to get to do things, even the type of clothing he gets to wear, that other characters are just simply not allowed to do. He gets to carry a sword in the city, right? And no other character can do that, right? But there's also things he can't do. That if he did it, it would be scandalous. If he did it, it would be dangerous for him. Or he simply isn't going to be able to succeed at doing it that other characters can, right? So if you go to some podunk village and you're trying to investigate a group of heretics, the villagers will treat your cleric with the utmost of respect, right? Just like everyone will. Clerics have huge social credit in this game, right? Because they're part of the clergy. Your noble will be treated with very much respect by the people, but they're not going to tell them their secrets, right? They're not going to like give them the latest gossip, right? You're not going to be able to go and find out, where there's people doing poaching, right? That's not something that social class is going to learn. That's what you need the kind of the peasant thief guy for, right? So this is a way of getting niche protection in a way. Social class is niche protection. Card Captor Lee says L&D is a better Game of Thrones than the actual Song of Ice and Fire RPG from back in the 2000s. That may well be true. I'm not super familiar with that game, but I certainly think that if you didn't really want to play in medieval Europe, but you wanted to play in Westeros, you could probably do it fairly easily with Lion and Dragon. Mariah Sinclair says, like Harold Godwinson, Arrow in the Eye. Yeah, exactly. That was a guy. Changed the entire course of history by one unlucky arrow. Richard the Lionhearted died young from relatively young, from a crossbow bolt that was, ill-timed. Henry V died of disease, right? Which is another thing that we have in this game. There are disease rules in the game. Oh, that's poison, sorry. There's also poison rules. But, where is this? Saving throws, aging, healing, disease, right? So infection is a major problem for your characters in the game. Now, I do tell DMs that you can kind of decide how far you want to go with this, right? So, like, maybe you're not the kind of DM that wants that, when the player characters go into the city, they'll have a risk of getting cholera and just dying from cholera. Maybe that's not the kind of campaign you want. Maybe you want to have a very slight chance of getting an infection every time you're cut instead of, a moderate chance of that, right? Or maybe it's something that'll only happen if you took a critical hit or something like that. You can modify that, right? But there are rules here that cover diseases, and it's perfectly possible for your characters to die from disease. I had also found, mention here while I'm at it that there's a section on herbalism and poisons, which are all, again, medieval authentic. They're based on actual research about medieval apothecary, medieval herbalism, and how actual poisons used in the medieval period worked. Just thought I'd add that in there. Where are we now? I'm looking at the comments for a moment here. Gracie Smith says, I'd like more videos. I really like this channel even when I don't agree. Well, get us up. Share the videos. Share the videos. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Share the videos with everyone. Get us to 1,000 subscribers, and there will be more videos that I'm making right now. And that will continue, I think, to repeat as I keep getting other points of subscribers. If I get to the 2,000 mark, maybe I'll start doing 2+ videos a week. Greasy Smith says, by the way, your advice to run games with strangers instead of friends worked. This is the most successful game I've ever ran with complete strangers. I'm very glad to hear that, Greasy. And yeah, I mean, that's a very important point, right? Like sometimes, depending on what type of game you want, there are some games that maybe what you want is to just be hanging out playing with your friends, but there's some games where the best possible thing you can do is find a group of people who are more there to be there for the game than anything else, right? Mariah Sinclair says, SJW toxicity drives me nut. I keep that away from my table. I'm glad to hear that. My table has a no politics rule during the game. We sometimes end up talking about or discussing politics while we're getting ready for the game, and sometimes quite vocally, because I've got like some hardcore leftists at my table, and then I have some people that are more right-wing than I am. The Schwartz says, Dark Albion normal versus alternate cover, or both? Well, obviously the answer is both. You want to get both the normal cover and the variant cover. They're both awesome looking covers, right? What else have we got here for comments? George Whittlebox said, I had fun playing as an outlaw when I played Dark Albion. Had to constantly lie about who I was. Yeah, that's good stuff. Gustavus Adolphus got shot with a lucky bullet. or an unlucky one, I guess. Um, Alexander the Great, not medieval, but yes, those are all very good examples of what I'm talking about. Um, George Riddlebach Lorraine says, the only thing that bothers me is I like Grim Jim's rules for the Goetia a bit better. Well, I've never actually seen Grim Jim's rules for the Goetia, but if I had to guess, being someone who has actually summoned demons using the Goetia, I would say that probably, I don't know if they're better or not. Maybe his are more playable, but I'm pretty sure mine more effectively reflect the struggle that goes on in evocation. You know? I've actually been there, whereas Grim Jim is, a morally vacuous atheist who definitely has not done any Goetia. All right. George McLaren Coopy says the OSR. Oh no, sorry, that's not. That's Judd Goswick. Says the OSR allows for loads of module tinkering. Yeah, that's one of the great things about the OSR. You can change around. Unlike more new school games, you can change around certain rules without having it screw up everything else, right? So, case in point, in my combat system, where are we here? My combat system has parrying rules, right? Which is not something you see as a rule in most games, but in a medieval authentic game, it's kind of important, especially in the late medieval period, where basically the only shields that you still really used was a buckler for parrying. So the parrying rules add a whole mechanic that allow fighters, especially, but also other classes, to be able to sacrifice some of their to-hit bonus in the round to be actively parrying, which they can then use to block attacks against them. And I think I did a pretty good job with the parrying rules of making that work effectively. Also, while I'm here, might as well get to it. This is the critical section with a critical table, which, as you see, the critical injuries can be quite brutal, right? They can be really, really destructive. And your critical hits and what have you can easily kill a higher level character. I'll mention again, the RPG Pundit Presents series has a number of expansions telling these rules. So for example, in the main book, you get one single critical table that is used to resolve any critical hits. But there's an OSR Advanced Critical Hits source book for the RPG Pundit Presents, made exactly along the lines for Lion and Dragon, that expands this into multiple tables for each damage type. So like slashing, piercing, arrow, gun, bullet, claws, etc. attacks. So it's an expanded version with multiple tables, but they're all meant to be like quite anatomically focused so that you have injuries that will cause long-term effects in terms of, you get hit in the leg and you're going to be moving more slowly. You might, depending on how badly you're hit in the leg, you might be limping or you might never run again, And of course, there's results that can be like, you get your hand chopped off, which happened to one of my players in my current L&D game. He literally had his non-weapon hand ended up being chopped right off up to the kind of part of the forearm. He survived, which shows how tough he was, and now he's still fighting. His character's a knight, so there you go. Let me see here. Somebody has just shared there the Schwartz. Well, not just, because I'm way behind on the comments. The Schwartz said there's a Lulu coupon code for 15% off. So this is the moment. If you want to buy your Lion and Dragon or Dark Albion on Lulu, check it out, the 15% off code. The Schwartz put it in the comments, and he can confirm it works at this time. So this is the time to be buying these products. What else have we got for comments here? Looks like we're up to the top here. Cardcaptor Lee says, if I wanted to play Machiavelli or a stand-in thereof for L&D, what class would you recommend for him? Well, Machiavelli would not be one of the main classes in this book. However, as I mentioned, there's a source book, an RPG Pundit Presents PDF source book that is called, I think it's just called Courtiers, Priests, Craftsmen, and Sages. And it has those 4 classes, which are meant to be kind of like NPC classes, but you can actually play them as player characters also. So I would say Machiavelli would either be a courtier or a sage. They're kind of sort of interchangeable. Maybe he'd be more, Machiavelli himself would be more courtier than sage, which is not so much of an adventuring class, but you could do it. If you absolutely had to use the classes in the L&D book itself, Machiavelli could be run as a magister who doesn't have any magical techniques, because that is a thing, and I'll get to that soon here. So you made your character, you've got your social class, then you get one background skill based on what your social class is. This big table here is only used for characters who are city dwellers, that are in the top 25% of city dwellers, which are the tradesmen, right? That their family are involved in one of the trade guilds, and that's their trade skill. Then you get a random event, which there are 30 of them in the book here, that gives you some background detail, right? And they're not equally weighted, so like there's a better chance of common events than there's rare, than there's super rare events. There is, again, a supplement, an RPG Pundit Presents supplement called Expanded OSR Background Tables, which gives, like, I think it goes from 30 to something like 80 or 60, I forget now, but it like grossly expands the number of background material. So these are like one little detail that you can add to your character, right? Like very pious, cavalry trained, forester, had an encounter with chaos, elf touched. You don't want to be touched by an elf in this game. My old party are dead, so he's actually like, the character's actually already been out adventuring at some point, and everybody he knew died except him. He was the only survivor. So it's stuff like that, right? It's stuff that gives you a little bit of additional detail, right? So now you know your social class, you know something that happened in your past, stuff like that, right? Then you roll to see what your name is. Now, of course, you could, as the DM, just let your players pick their names. But one of the things that would not be very medieval authentic is like, you know, naming your Magister Gandalf, and there's always some idiot that wants to do something like that, right? Or your rogue, you know, your thief is named Dark Shadow Moonglaze or something like that, right? Like these are there's nothing that's going to ruin medieval authenticity faster than than using, you know, cheap bullshit from pop fantasy, right? So what have I got here? These are male names and female names. These two tables are actually the most popular male and female names for people in England in the 15th century. So that's the level of research that this has, okay? I'd say that's pretty good research. And what we have here are the same thing with male and female names in Scotland and Wales for the Scotsman and the Cymry. So, sorry, just updating myself here. There's 25 people watching. Hey, that's not bad. All right. All people should be named Cuthbert. All characters should be named Cuthbert. Well, that's one good name. Cuthbert was a medieval name. After this, you generate your character at level 0. So, as if you didn't want to make it like tough enough, you have a 0 level character, which is to say somebody who is just beginning. There is one background that lets you start at level 1. But otherwise, you're a level 0 guy, which means that if you're a cleric, you're like an acolyte who is just about to take their vows. A magister, you're still a scholar that you're about to graduate. A thief, you're an apprentice thief that's about to get there. A fighter, you're if you're high rank, you're a squire. If not, you're just like a common soldier who hasn't really gotten all the way yet, right? So but you get, your very first adventure, you're going to be starting with just like D6 hit points. I don't know if you can see that right there. There we go. With like a D6 hit points, no combat bonus, your saving throws are just basic. So The saving throw mechanic here is an OSR mechanic where you have one single number. It starts out at 16, you modify it negatively by charisma. This is like your difficulty number. So you roll d20, you get 16 or higher, you saved, if not, you failed. And then this gets modified by different things. As you go up in level, that number might get reduced. But it's always that same number is the basic. And then you modify it in a specific save if you have, your character might have a bonus of +2 versus magic, or +2 versus poisons, or he might have, there are going to be some saves where you're going to do a save that is modified by a specific ability score. So if you're like trying to jump out of the way of an explosion, it would be modified by your dexterity modifier. So you'd roll a d20, you do the modifier, and you need to get that number or higher, and that's it. It's a very straightforward system for saving throws. Alignment, there's only 3 alignments: law, chaos, and neutrality. Most people in the world are neutral. I've already covered earlier in the live stream the topic of women in the setting. Wealth and equipment. You get equipment that is again organized by social class, right? So a peasant will start with some like padded armor and a spear, and then somebody who's from the lordly or aristocracy class, they start with a riding horse, sword, shield, hauberk and plate, or full plate, depending on how rich they are. Because remember, not all nobles were rich, and not all rich people were noble. But yeah, that's the equipment lists. This thing. All right. And then we get to the actual classes. And there was one thing in particular I wanted to point out about the classes, which are the benefits tables. Just checking the updates here. Aaron RPA says, I want to stream like this for Lords of Olympus. Well, I might end up doing that. Yeah, sure. If people like this sort of thing, why not? If you're into it, I'm willing. Okay. So let's say you survive your first adventure. Now you're level 1, right? When you become level 1, you're going to get your first level in the class you chose when you created the character. And you're going to get some hit points, like a cleric here gets a d8 hit points, a fighter gets a d10. This is in addition to the hit points you already had as a level 0 character. And then there are some special benefits, right? So like a cleric gets a +2 to save versus magic. And a fighter doesn't really get anything in terms of their saves, but they get +2 to attack. And fighters have an ability where they can attack a number of opponents of 1 hit die or less equal to their level. They also add half of their damage rounded up, half of their level in damage rounded up to all melee and range damage, right? So I want fighters to be very effective in this game. You might have noticed when I was showing you the section on armor way back that their armor bonus is different for fighters and clerics than for other classes. That's because the fighters and clerics are specially trained to fight in armor. Clerics start with a clerical miracle. I'll talk more about magic in a second. And then what you do is you roll on the benefits table, right? So you got the cleric benefits table here. Here's the fighter benefits table. And every time you go up a level after that, all you're going to get is a set amount of hit points, which is like 1 hit point for like clerics. For most classes, fighters get 2, but that's not very much anyways, right? So you get just a little bit of hit point inflation, and then you roll. You roll twice on the table, and you get what you rolled. Or you have the option instead to pick, but then you just pick 1, right? And so this is a mechanic that means that you can randomly increase certain benefits, and it means that 2 characters of the same class and the same level are going to be different from each other. That's not super common in old school games. It allows for a more diverse variety of characters. So you might have, like in my current Lion and Dragon campaign, I've got 2 guys that are knights. They're both fighters, but one of them, he ended up having from like his rolls, he got a lot of benefits to attacking, to hit bonus, right? And he's got quite a bit of extra hit points, which you can get as one of the entries for the class. And so he's a fairly tough guy, and he's good at hitting. And I had another guy that what he got was, he got quite lucky and ended up getting 2 times an extra attack. So he's not as good at hitting as the other guy, but he's pretty decent. He actually kind of has built it up, so now he's relatively fairly good at hitting. But he attacks 3 times per round, right? Which makes him a much faster hitter. But he doesn't have nearly as many hit points. So the other guy can just keep fighting and fighting. This guy, he's a killing machine, but he's got a bit of a glass jaw. And so that makes for an interesting kind of diversity between the classes, right? Or within the classes, I should say. Now, the thing is, though, sometimes that could lead to imbalance, right? Or maybe you just really want certain things, right? So what you can do is you can sacrifice quantity of bonus for quality of bonus by saying, well, I'm not, instead of rolling twice, I'm just going to pick a thing. If you really want to get that second attack, you can say, well, this time I'm getting to level 4 now. I want to have 2 attacks per round. So instead of rolling twice, I'm just going to pick that one once. It means that if you do that every time, it ruins the possibility for people to do like this character optimization build thing, because the optimal thing is really to go random, because you'll always get double as many bonuses, even if they're random bonuses. So if you're picking every single time, your character is going to be by 7th or 8th level much weaker than a guy who rolled randomly every single time, because you've only had, let's say, a 7th level. You've only had 7 bonuses, whereas he's had 14, right? Just by pure odds, he's going to be a way more powerful character than you. But at the same time, what you can do is sometimes strategically choose to pick just one in order to balance out something that you think your character is lacking. Thank you. Vision Storm says that's a really interesting mechanic. I agree. So, Magisters here, they also, every class has its own benefits table, right? Magisters, I should note, are not just spellcasters. Here's the list of Magister techniques. Magisters are also lore masters, right? And in actual play of Lion and Dragon, in my experience, because Magister's magic is almost all ritual-based, it requires ingredients and a place to do it, and usually it's expensive. It's something that takes time to build up for a character to get to where they can be regularly doing a lot of magic, or they need a wealthy patron. And because it's very it's never, almost none of the spells for Magisters are stuff that you're going to cast in the heat of the moment or something like that. It becomes almost as important, if not sometimes more important, the lores that the characters have, right? So knowing court politics and etiquette, right? Apothecary, right? Apothecary is very useful. History, law and medicine, and even like general occultism, which allows you to identify magical creatures or magical artifacts or things like that. To say nothing of languages if you're playing certain types of campaigns. All of those are in some ways more important to the Magister on a regular basis than the just mere fact of being able to do magic. So I think that that's a very interesting detail that you only see coming out in actual play, right? Like the characters that play Magisters will be using their lores all the time to use their magic, unless there are very few spells that you can just kind of do on the fly, but almost all the other ones you need to pre-prepare it, right? So it's not the same. Judd Goswick says, I like the choose one or roll 2 aspect. Raving Bean says, just better to roll. Judd Goswick says, as I just said, it kills the min-maxing car optimization garbage. I agree. That's exactly why I did it. So, in case you're wondering, you got the thief. The thief is probably the most normal, you could say, the one that's the most in keeping with what D&D type classes are, right? So they have all the thief skills. They can do a backstab. There are some interesting skills that they get. Urban lore wilderness lore, court lore that they can get from the benefits table: disguise, appraisal, forged documents, artifact lore. But they're pretty standard there, right? Then the Kimri are slightly anachronistic because they're really, travelers were something that only really started happening in the Renaissance, not so much in the medieval period. But I wanted to have a character that's kind of the jack of all trades. The Kimri are basically Welsh travelers that are the absolute outcasts of society. Like, you're playing gypsies, basically, right? So you're playing within the medieval context of society. You have these characters that are, they're not the same culture. They have a weird tradition. They're always going to be suspect. They know magic, right? So like that isn't like licensed magic, so to say. So they're seen as very dangerous, right? They even claim that they have descended from elf blood, right? So and they're famous for being con men, whether that's an earned reputation or not. And makes an interesting character for some people to play. It's also a very risky character to play in the game. They are, if you're running it medievally authentically, they're going to be the first person blamed for anything, right? And if you're playing it medievally authentically, at the same time, what you should have is that the travelers, they back each other up, they support each other. They have their codes, and they're also very involved in the underworld, and they're seen as very useful agents by some people, usually people up to shady business, right? After that, the Scotsman. Well, the Scotsman is kind of the barbarian, you could say, right? Which is mean on my part to the Scotsman, but there you have it. So, like, they're the class that is tougher. They have, like, way more hit points than a typical fighter. They have way better saves, but they're not quite as good at actual attacking. So they're the brick wall rather than the offensive assault. There's some really amazing, as you've noticed, every page. This is Dom Publishing. This isn't me. I had nothing to do with it. But like every page of this book is covered in art, right? It's like, doesn't matter which page you open it to, right? Any page, you're going to find it. That's like part of the style that Dom Publishing, that Dominique Cruzet of Dom Publishing does, right? So physically, artistically, aesthetically, it's a beautiful book. The layout and the art, I have to say, Dom, one of the things I'll definitely give him credit for, and the reason why I stayed with him for Dark Albion, Cults of Chaos, and Lion and Dragon, is because his layout work, the quality of his layout and his his art. He didn't draw any of this himself, but like how he puts it all together, it's amazing, right? This is a guy that people should really hire to do this stuff for their own projects, in my opinion, because they're beautiful, beautiful books. Greasy Smith says, "What happens if you roll the same thing twice? It stacks, right? So." If you get like on a table, you leveled up and you got extra hit points, then extra hit points, you just got a lot of extra hit points that level. That's how it works. Kimri have charm and also charms. Thank you for that. Yeah, the visual presentation of this book is amazing. So, magic. There is no Vancian magic here. It's one of the biggest differences between this and standard D&D. You do not memorize spells. You don't have a spell list. You don't have spell levels. The way that it works is completely different. All the magic in this game is based on medieval authentic sources. Well, the Magister magic, right? The cleric magic is basically common miracles, right? And you see that the clerics only have like 8 different miraculous powers. If they get all 8 of them, once you've had all 8 miraculous powers, then your character at that point can call directly for divine intervention, which is a big deal. It's something that makes your character, you basically pray for big time miracles. So that's something for clerics to aim for, right? Each prayer, like clerics pray by rolling a d20, it's a prayer check, you roll a d20, you add your wisdom, and you add your level. And you have to beat a difficulty. And each type of miracle has usually a couple of different uses, right? So like blessing You can use it to give you a single bonus, to give the person you bless a single bonus to a d20 based roll sometime in the next day. Or it can be used to purify food and water, or it can be used to create holy water. Okay? The big benefit that clerics have, even though they don't have a lot of powers, laying on hands, sanctuary, turn undead, visions, even though they don't have a lot of powers, is that clerics don't, they're really the combat magic of the game, in the sense that all they have to do is pray. And usually, for most of their miracles, pray for like one round. Sometimes it might be for 1 minute, sometimes it might be for 10 minutes, usually for the stuff that isn't so much emergency prayer, so to say. And then, when they get to higher level, they have divine intervention, which will then lead to divine missions as God requires them to do it. Just like in D&D, if you're, a cleric that sins will end up losing the divine favor. But the Magisters is where you get really into different stuff, which is that the entire magic system is based on medieval sources, right? Like the grimoire magic of the Middle Ages, plus medieval legends and folklore, and medieval historical accounts of supposed magical events that happened, or supposed things that wizards did in the Middle Ages. So this is medieval authentic magic. And you have to remember, magic is essential for a medieval authentic game. Some people are saying, well, as soon as you have like people that can do curses for real, it's not really the medieval world anymore. It's just fantasy, right? That's exactly wrong. It's the exact opposite of that, because in the medieval world, everyone knew that curses were real, and people really got cursed. And you can say, well, but they didn't really do anything, except that they did. They had, measurable effects on people at that time, right? There were all kinds of magical events that happened in this world. They lived in, to paraphrase, I think it's Dawkins, a demon-haunted world, right? Or is that Sagan? I forget. But they lived in a world where their paradigm was these things are as real to them as gravity is to us, right? They maybe never saw it personally, but they knew it existed, right? And some of them did see it personally. I mean, there's completely credible accounts with multiple witnesses of a werewolf eating someone in France, right? Now, we know in this day and age, there's no such thing as werewolves, right? Because that's our paradigm, right? But in their world, there absolutely were werewolves, and they absolutely ate a dude in France, and everyone saw it happen, right? So here you are. That's just how it works. Okay, so the system for magic users is exactly the same. D20 roll plus caster level plus stat. In the Magister's case, it's intelligence. Versus varying difficulties. Now, the thing is, most of Magister's powers are stuff that you can't just do on the fly. For example, to summon, you have to make a magical circle, and you can kind of do, summoning you can really do on the fly, but you really shouldn't, because you get a bunch of penalties to the summoning check, and it could all go horribly wrong, right? But if you're going to do it really right, you need like a magical room, you need magical inks, you need magical tools, you need to spend a small fortune to have all of those, though most of those things are reusable. And then you do like the summoning check to summon a demon. To summon the demon, first you have to have his name and his sigil. Now, first level magisters start with summoning as a talent, like they know how to summon. But they don't start with a name and a sigil of a demon. So the first thing that your magister is going to have to do if he wants to do any summoning is find the name and sigil of a demon, which he'll probably only be able to find in certain books, in certain libraries, which will require permissions, right, and will require explanations. But remember, in a medieval authentic world, summoning demons was, because one of the mistakes we make now is you think, oh, that's satanic, right? That was black magic. No, the people summoning demons to bind them were Christians, right? And they were doing it with authorization so long as they were being Christian in doing it. Now, the thing is, when in the medieval context of demon summoning, when you summon a demon, you can do one of two things with it. You can make a pact with it, or you can bind it. If you're making a pact with it, yeah, that's a grave sin. That's black magic. You're selling your soul to a demon, right? But if you bind it in the name of the Lord to obey you so that you can do something for the good of humanity, for the grace of God, and what have you, That reflects in the mechanics of the game, where your ability to dominate the demon is going to be modified by your character being pious, right, and being religious. So religious wizards have an easier time of being able to control the demon for binding purposes. So this was seen as something acceptable. Now, of course, anyone doing magic involving demons will be under some scrutiny. But it's not scrutiny in the sense that everybody who does it will be punished for it. It's scrutiny in the sense of we want to be sure that they're not doing it for the wrong reasons, right? So what happens when you summon a demon? Well, they can give you knowledge. They can go and perform a task for you. They can allow you the use of a specific power that they will have. There's a set of random mechanics for creating random demons in the book. And then otherwise, there's some source books that have material on demons. The Goetia source book in Pundit Presents is that number 2, I think? I think it's number 2. Greasy Smith says, I've seen it happen 11 times, in fact, them werewolves. So, Greasy, you've seen 11 werewolf killings? That's quite a lot for the modern era, I've got to say. Mariah says, by horribly wrong, I take it you mean accidentally summoning furry little creatures that multiply if you get them wet? Well, no, probably not. It means that, you end up being possessed by the demon that you summoned, or let it loose into the world, or stuff like that, right? So then we get into the other magical skills, right? Like you have astrology, which is something it takes, about 10 minutes to do if you have an ephemeris. It's not that hard. But astrology has kind of limits. There is a source book that I've put out now called Advanced Astrology, which adds some more stuff, because astrology was kind of the weakest power by the book. By the book, it's basically just a divination system that lets you kind of get an idea of what will be the right direction to go in terms of a question. My Advanced Astrology source book adds to that stuff like astrological potions, astrological modifiers to certain events. So if you pick an auspicious date to get a bonus to do something, astrological cures, and other stuff like that. So you can check out that source book. If you've already got Lion and Dragon and you think astrology isn't interesting enough, that source book makes it a lot more interesting. Cures, medieval magicians, unlike D&D wizards, were really, really big on healing. Healing was a big part of what they did. They could cure disease. They could cure injury. They could remove infection. They could cure madness. They could cure blindness. They could even cure hunger. But none of these are like stuff you can do by just touching someone like a cleric can. A cleric lays hands on you and you're cured, right? Whereas a wizard, to heal you, needs to like make a fine crystal cup that costs you like £1, keep it clean, anoint it with oils that cost you another £1. Then you have to perform this invocation. And then if you give it to the person and they'll heal at twice their normal rate. They won't just be like miraculously cured at that same instant that they drink it. That's the way that medieval magister magic works. After this, you get banishing, right, which lets you like cast out spirits or create safe spaces. You could call it, I was going to say create safe spaces. You can create like your own magister's room, which will give you all kinds of bonuses to doing other rituals in it. Battle magic. Battle magic is one of the only areas where you got like stuff that is useful as is in combat. But even these like require that you do stuff first. So, like the blasting wand is kind of the typical, where the magic wand comes out of. It's like a stick that when you strike someone with it will wither them or smote them or smite them down or whatever you want to call it, right? So this comes out of medieval folklore. And the thing about the blasting wand is you have to create it, you have to charge it, costs you a permanent point of constitution to make it, and then after that you've got something that you can use in combat, right? The Bread of Gideon, I got one of the magisters in my current campaign loves this stuff. This is a relatively simple one in that all you need to do is actually bake some bread and then do an invocation of it, and it takes you as long as it takes to bake the bread, and then another like 10 minutes or so. So that's considered a fast spell by standards of L&D for magisters. And the bread, when you eat the bread, this is real medieval stuff too. When you eat the bread, it will like give you good luck, give people who try to hurt you bad luck, right? And especially will protect you against supernatural creatures, right? Unseen enemy. This is one of the ones that is easiest to cast. It only takes 3 rounds. It's basically the invisibility spell of the game, but it's again medievally authentic. And if you look at what it says there, the way to cast invisibility in Lion and Dragon involves that you have to how does it say here? You have to take off your left shoe, circle it in the air 7 times, and then shake it in the air 7 times while reciting magical words, right? So I've always thought that's really funny. This is actually from a medieval spell, right? So in the Middle Ages, if you were a medieval wizard and you wanted to become invisible, you had to take off your shoe and make yourself incredibly conspicuous first before you became invisible, right? I just think that that's hilarious. Mariah, thank you for coming. I think maybe you've probably already left. I just saw that you're leaving now. Thank you so much for all of your questions. Then here we have one of the most powerful Magister spells to make the earth tremble. This basically creates an earthquake, a little earthquake, but it's a big enough earthquake to take down a building, right? And the thing is, it's kind of dangerous, right? You never know what's going to happen once you've cast it, and there are times where this might end up actually killing your Magister in the earthquake. Misfortune cursing, that's your classical curse. Astrological talismans, right? Here you have to make talismans out of certain metals, make them with certain symbols, and they'll be like connected to certain magical spirits of the planets, right? Because the planets were thought to have their own spirits. And when you're creating this, it takes this whole big process besides actually making the artifact itself. And if you do it wrong, you could end up being possessed by the spirit of the planet, right? Which will have like weird effects, right? Like a martial character will become obsessed with killing and violence, right? If they've been possessed by a spirit of Mars. Whereas a solar spirit will be only interested in living the life of poverty and self-denial, right? And then, there are talismans. So every time you take one of the magical techniques, they aren't all or nothing like clerical techniques where there's only the 8 of them. With magical techniques, the first time you take them, you'll get some of the abilities. The second time, you'll get more. So you can end up taking the same technique multiple times in order to get all of the different things that it can do, right? So like the talismans, the first time you take it, you'll be able to create some planets talismans, and then each time you take it, you'll get some more planets. And different planets will have different effects for different types of talismans. And these are like really useful. Basically, you're an artificer of magic items with this. And same thing with when we get to true alchemy. And true alchemy lets you make some really powerful magic items, right? Like the ever-burning lantern. That's like the basic level of that. Curative potions, powder that makes rain. And then like when you get to larger alchemy, you got like Byzantine dragon fire, golems. You can make your own golem. Homunculi, a talking head. There's the talking head. And you can make a universal physic, all kinds of stuff. And of course, at the highest tier, when you take it 3 times, you can actually do one of the 2 great works of alchemy: the elixir of life, that is supposed to grant you immortality, and the philosopher's stone, which we all know turns lead into gold, but also does a bunch of other very, very powerful things. So these are this is high level stuff, right? And high level magic item making, basically. But it's really costly. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time for the character. There are risks, right? This is not your standard, memorize, cast, and forget sort of spell. And you have to be interested in that sort of thing. If you want a casting character that just gets shit done, then I guess you probably should go with a cleric in Lion and Dragon. Whereas this is the one. If you're playing a magister, you have to think and prepare and be planning and doing stuff in between sessions and stuff like that, right? So, starting to wind it down here, I just wanted to cover a couple of other details. My cat seems offended at all this movement. I already talked about disease, herbalism. I talked about pairing. I talked about critical tables, so that's all good. Experience. In this game, you don't have the standard experience points, and you don't get experience in the standard way. In this, I decided when I made Lion and Dragon that the experience system is just, you show up for the session, you participate in the session, you get 1 experience point. So you need X amount of experience points to level up, right? Like when you're level 0, you complete your first adventure, you become level 1. After that, you start gaining experience points. So at first you need like 2 experience points to get to level 2, blah, blah, blah. And then pretty quickly, by like 3rd level onwards, it's multiples of 5. So it roughly 5 sessions to go up each level. That might be modified because the DM might choose to give like extra points for the best role player, or if it's like particularly epic or what have you, right? So the DM can play around with it. It's not a big deal. But the point is, I chose this really simple system because one of the things that isn't medieval authentic about D&D is this idea of characters getting experience by doing a lot of fighting or collecting a lot of treasure, right? Whether you're doing the XP from gold pieces or XP from combat or both. Because those are things that would not have been absolutely natural to be doing constantly in the medieval world, right? Like for starters, a cleric has a vow of poverty, right? A noble isn't supposed to care about money, even if they secretly do. But you can't have like a noble, searching a body to get like 3 copper pieces, and that the player does this to the noble because that's experience points that he's going to get that he won't get if he doesn't do it, right? So like there you would be like forcing characters to play against their medieval authentic type just to satisfy, what the rules say you need to do to level up. So I didn't want to do that sort of thing. So what I wanted people to do is, look, you come, you play your character in a medieval authentic fashion, whatever way you want your character to go, right? If you want your character to be a guy that fights a lot, he can fight a lot, but he's not fighting a lot because of the XP. He doesn't feel like he must fight a lot to level up, right? If you want to be a guy that wants a lot of treasure, you can do that too. But you don't have to get treasure to level up, right? You don't have to do anything to level up except participate and just role play your character and do that well, right? And that's it. So I think that's generally a good idea for most game systems. Anyway, treasure, as you can see, treasure here is done by like quality of like poor, non-supernatural animal, wealthy, supernatural intelligent, criminal, supernatural unintelligent, tombs, catacombs, barrows, or religious. And you'll roll X amount of times depending on how wealthy the level of the treasure loot is. And then there's like treasure tables, right? That are the sub-tables that you have depending on the type of what you roll. So as you can see, for example, your treasure might be like cows, right? And that's because, this is a coin poor economy, right? Like the idea that you'd find 30,000 gold pieces or something like that is just ridiculous, right? So there's a lot of focus on treasure being in the form of objects. Now, you can, of course, find jewels and gems also, but I think that this is a much more medieval authentic way of doing the treasure as well. Anyone still with me here? I haven't seen comments in a while. Maybe I've bored everyone at this point. Okay, just one more thing to talk about though, which is the magic items. So once again, magic items here are all medieval authentic. They're either based on actual medieval items that are from medieval folklore, medieval stories, or that exist in real life that we know they exist, but that had magic, that were attributed to be magical, or there's stuff that is directly influenced by that notion of how people thought magic items worked, right? Which is basically that they were either stuff that had like angelic or demonic qualities, were linked to great magicians, or were linked to people of great renown and events of great renown. So, for example, I've determined that an Agincourt bow, a bow that was used at the Battle of Agincourt, is like a minor magic item, right? Now, as you can see, there's quite a few magic items here. There's more of them in some of the RPG Pundit Presents stuff that I add a few other items, but characters in this game are not going to like have, it's not like in standard D&D where a typical character is going to have several magic items by the time they're 2nd or 3rd level. You might not have even seen a magic item by then. Odds are that the magic items you're most likely to get first are the ones that a magister makes for you, like the stuff that the player characters can do themselves, because they are meant to be rare. Like these epic items are meant to be rare, right? The sword of Julius Caesar, the carpenter's sword, that's a real item from history. Cortaine, Joyeuse, and Durandal. Lots of magic swords, of course, because that's a big part of medieval folklore and legend. The sword was a big deal. Elened's ring, an elf tunic, stuff like that, right? The claw of a griffin. This is the other thing. In the monster section, I include a lot of material of like killing a certain monster, you know, what medieval people thought you could do with its body parts. The Jarl's ring, blah, blah, blah. All right, so basically, runes, right? Stuff like that. And the sword plus 0 is something that I've always liked, which is like, you know, in a game like Lion and Dragon, having a weapon that has no special bonuses, but that can simply damage supernatural entities, that would be a very, very valuable item by itself. So, yeah, I think I've covered just about everything now, and we're at 90 minutes, so it's a very good place to stop. I think now you've gotten an idea of how Lion and Dragon is, how it works. I'll just mention right at the back, after the monsters, there's a section on law and justice with trials. There's a mechanic for resolving a medieval court case, and lists of punishments, various punishments for each type of crime. Of course, a lot of these are guilty. You know, execution is the basic punishment. There wasn't a lot of like, you know, you didn't serve a prison sentence, not ever, right? Prison is where they kept you until they judged you, not where they put you after you were judged. But yeah, so this is a very interesting, and you know, even you can have civil lawsuits. This is a very interesting little system, and it helps give people some idea of how the rules worked in the medieval world. Then there's like Wilderland adventuring, some basic material on generating some random encounters in ruins and stuff. Wilderland settlements, because that's like a big part of the notion of the wildness, right? Like your adventures, odds are they're going to end up going to a Wilderland region, because that's where the mysterious and the chaotic is. And so there's some random tables to help you out in that. Then there you got the character sheet at the back. It's a nice looking character sheet. Edited. And yeah, that's it. So I hope you like this. I hope this was a useful thing for some of you who are watching this. Please consider picking up Lion and Dragon, Medieval Authentic OSR role-playing. Check out my other products. Check out if you've already got Lion and Dragon, check out some of the RPG Pundit Presents titles, which is what I'm coming out with now. Every week there's a new product. You can find that on drive-through. And again, subscribe, share this video or share my other videos. Get us up to that 1,000 subscribers section. Get us to that hallmark, I should say. And you know, if you've already bought all of my stuff and you don't want to support me by buying my products, which I'm perfectly happy for you to be doing, you can also back me on Patreon. I'm very grateful for that. If I get a lot of Patreon back, I've got like 2 Patreon backers, because you know, I don't like Patreon very much, and most of my audience, you know, being people who know, you know, some of our friends have been banned from Patreon. We don't like Patreon very much, and I get that. So if you don't want to back me on Patreon, you can also go to my blog, the RPG Pundit blog. It's going to be in the description. And off to the right side of the blog, the right-hand column, you're going to find a PayPal button that you can support me with PayPal. But really, you know, buy my stuff. That's a great way to support me. Vision Storm here just said, there's a lot of material in the book that I could use even if I don't play it as is. Well, that's one of the great things about the OSR, right? Is that the OSR is super interchangeable. You can use all kinds of stuff from other books in the campaign, whatever campaign you're running. There's also a lot of stuff in Lion and Dragon that you could use in like later edition D&D too. So yeah, definitely. You might never actually play L&D itself, but you'll probably find a lot of stuff in there, especially like, you know, monsters, magic items, rituals, herbalism, all that stuff that you might want to add to your D&D game, for example. So yeah, be sure to share as much as possible the video. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get warned if next time. I gave a half-hour warning for this live stream. Next time I'll try to do 45 minutes. We'll see if I can do that. And I swear, if we get to 1,000 subscribers, I will try to do one pre-scheduled live stream per month. That's my promise to you. Okay, I'll do my very best, and yeah, share it everywhere, get the word out there, and let's see how far we can get with this thing. We can do it, people. All right, that's everything for today. Currently smoking, or just finished smoking actually just now, a near a poker plus. See, it's almost empty there.